So let's now move on to the notion of complements and how have they influenced the industry's profitability between the 90s and now, the 1980s and now, and today. And remember that a complement is something, or complements are two products or services that gain more joint value than they do individual value. So to the extent that things like applications and computer peripherals like printers or digital cameras are valuable, so too are the PCs, presumably because they're bought in connection with those peripherals. So for example, let's talk about applications for PCs. So we know that software prices, have dropped, while functionality has improved. And the number of apps and more, we'll put more apps are out there. And free open source software, for example, like Google Docs, has become increasingly available. So more available. And most productivity apps, with the exception of a product like Microsoft Office, have seen significant price reductions, right? So to the extent that productivity, to the extent that productivity apps have seen price reductions, then so too would the demand for PCs rise. So in theory, having more apps out there makes it more desirable to spend money on hardware, so stimulating demands. Oops, there we go. Now, then you've got peripherals, okay? So things like printers, digital cameras, things that connect to or gain functionality from PC usage, right? It's not like you would buy a printer if you didn't have the computer to hook it up to. It's not going to have its value. So the prices on these peripherals, on these, have also likewise dropped. So to the extent that they're cheaper, more readily available, that helps fuel demand for the core PC product. Okay. And so the key here is that it may well be, the summary on peripherals might be, let's put summary, that it may be a bright spot, but many apps are written for substitutes as well. So, when you think about it, if everybody is benefiting, even the substitutes are benefiting from declining prices in peripherals and an increasing number of valuable apps, then everybody benefits. So it's kind of hard to tell whether it is actually beneficial uniquely for the PC industry. Now, lastly, let's go to the force of the role of suppliers. And, so where does the balance of power lie between manufacturers like Apple and suppliers? So it's an important question for us to ask. Let's format that as well. Oh, that worked out really well. Okay. I should have had this fixed. I don't know what happened there. Okay. So, for example, suppliers of components such as disk drives drives are numerous. They are numerous and have no real power over PC makers/manufacturers. And it's largely because there's so many of them. I actually drew up a slide that I hope might help make sense here. In terms of thinking about the balance of power, and this could relate to suppliers and buyers, but I wanted to create it just for the purpose of thinking about suppliers. Let's pretend for the sake of this that we're talking about men in the world seeking romance. Say there are 9 men who are all in the market for romance, and let's say the main suppliers of that romance, assuming these are all straight men, are these 2 women here. They're on a deserted island, 9 men, 2 women. So there aren't that many suppliers of romance, but many men looking. And let's say for the sake of it that all these men were attracted to these 2 women. So who do you think would have the power in this case? It would be the women, because there are fewer women. All the men want to date them, so the women can, quote, extract more concessions and garner more romantic attention because there are simply fewer of them. Whereas if all of a sudden we multiplied and these women suddenly went from 2 to 100, it would shift the balance of power, because then all of a sudden for every 1 man there would be 10 women. So each woman would be competing with 9 other women for the affection of one of these men, arguably. So likewise, it's the same way with the same type of relationship between suppliers and manufacturers or buyers and manufacturers. So because there are so many disk drive providers and other component suppliers, there are many, many, many of them, it's easy to choose. And you can't extract it's not as easy for them to extract concessions. But one of the reasons I created this is because if you think about Intel and Microsoft as examples of suppliers, we know that Microsoft and Intel are major suppliers to PC manufacturers. And by relative comparison, here are the 2 of them. Here's Intel with its great brand, Intel Inside, and here is Microsoft with its Windows. And arguably here are all of the PC manufacturers. There just aren't that many of them. So they can demand higher prices for their goods, which decreases the profitability of the PC manufacturers and shifts that profit to Microsoft and Intel, for example. So I'll talk about this a little bit later. This is in relation to smartphones. Okay, so while the component makers don't have any real power, Intel and Microsoft, who have huge economies of scale to build CPUs and develop modern operating systems and have strong brands, have enormous power over the PC makers, PCers. Okay, an enormous power. And by the way, the case mentions that between these 2 companies, they have, if I remember correctly, $35 billion in profit between the 2 of them versus a much smaller profit for the PC makers by relative profit comparison. So let's I know I put it down a little bit lower here. Okay, so the summary here is that Intel and Microsoft, whom we will collectively refer to as Wintel, hold strong bargaining power over PC manufacturers. Okay, so when you think about it, we put together all these 5 forces and think, okay, well, what do they all have to say about the conclusion or industry? We have, for one, sophisticated, price-sensitive, fairly powerful buyers. We have an intense rivalry among existing firms, low entry barriers, a number of substitutes. See how the picture gets bleaker for the PC industry? And suppliers like Intel and specifically Intel and Microsoft appropriate a good portion of residual profits. Okay, so taken together, what we can conclude is that the PC industry is not a great choice to be in on the whole. Not an easy business. It's not a great business. Bum-ba-dum. Final conclusion, and we'll just put that in, say, blue. That is our overarching analysis. Now, okay, so while the industry may not be all that attractive, we next have to ask ourselves, though, what about Apple? You know, they've still been able to do really well. We know this. So the question is that sustainable over time? What I've done, I've already created the spreadsheet here, so you didn't have to watch me actually type. I thought it'd be, for the earlier discussion, I thought it'd be better to, oops, yeah, I was trying to focus you up here. I thought it would be better to type it in as I'm discussing, but here there's too much to type, so I'm going to keep it in here. I've already put it in here for you. So in many ways, Apple may be immune to the aforementioned problems associated with the industry. So as we know, it has loyal customers, it's got proprietary technology, and therefore high barriers to entry because it would cost so much money, billions of dollars, to create one's own proprietary technology, aka software or operating system. And historically, Apple didn't buy from Intel or Microsoft, so they were immune from the strong buying power. Supplier power. But nonetheless, as we know, Apple suffered dearly from 1998 to 2001 when it hit rock bottom in 1996. And what was the problem? You know, why was Apple so weak in the 90s? And for one, it was because of declining differentiation. Remember, differentiation has to do with how well you are able to make your products seem unique and have non-price value added. And that goes back to Porter's article. Remember, you're either a low-cost leader or arguably you're a differentiator. That is, you have a higher cost structure, but you are able to create more attributes that appeal to people who will pay more for those attractive attributes. So, but the key is that in the 90s, while Macs aren't the same as the Wintels, remember, Windows, Intel PCs, both are still substitutes. And during that time period, they both experienced declining prices, and the Intel PCs did. And in general, there were declining prices through the industry. So it put a squeeze on Apple's prices and margins. And problems were exacerbated with the release of Windows in 1990 and then Windows 1995, which narrowed the gap because both of these were very strong operating system releases. So it makes them as substitutes more attractive, and as a consequence, Apple lost market share. Also is the issue of application software. So meaning, again, independent software vendors write applications for PCs. Now, the PC industry benefited from the declining software prices. Apple, on the other hand, wasn't able to leverage that benefits because it didn't sell as many computers, and as a consequence, it didn't have the large installed base that other vendors, that is PC manufacturers, made. So if you look in Exhibit 4, the number of installed base of PCs compared to that of Macs became more dramatic over time. Even now, when you think about it, Apple does not sell the most computers. It just dominates the higher end of the market. So because it wasn't able to get out as many PCs, it didn't benefit as much from lower app prices. Now, another issue is what's called the operating system. matters. And so as various pressures cut into Apple's installed base, the economics of operating systems began to work against Apple. Let me check on my time here.